My name is Ana Neruda Moya, and I'm an archivist with the state of New Mexico's Department of Cultural Affairs. And that's our unit in the state that contains museums, historic sites, and the state library. I've also previously been an archivist at the U.S. National Archives and at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. So between those two facilities, that's 37 linear miles of material. So I speak from that perspective too. I want to talk to you today about a project of the state's Museum of Indians Arts and Culture, or MIAC. MIAC grew out of a project funded by Nielsen Rockefeller in 1929 that was known as the Laboratory of Anthropology. And the idea of that project was to create an institution parallel to the Smithsonian or to the Peabody, but that would be located in the Southwest so that ethnography and objects would stay in the Southwest. Over time, that grew into a state institution, and the inheritor of that is MIAC today. MIAC also just recently gained its first ever Native director, and in part of planning processes, we've been looking at how can the museum connect more effectively with Native communities in New Mexico. And we are the third largest state, so geography is not an insignificant consideration. New Mexico's a little bit different than a lot of other states. We have 23 tribes in New Mexico. 19 of those tribes are Pueblo, and the Pueblos weren't subjected to Indian removal like in other areas of the state. So people are still on their ancestral lands and practicing traditions along with living in contemporary life. Here's a little bit more about what we look like from the Pueblo of Santa Clara. You still have the core central plazas of the Pueblos, and this is an image from a really great collection that Princeton has put online. There's so much about the Southwest and other institutions that we're interested in learning from too. And then this is another aspect of the Native American experience in New Mexico and other states. This is sort of a famous picture from the U.S. government boarding school for Indians at Carlisle. One of the earliest schools. And these boarding schools, by definition, or part of their purpose was to take students from various reservations and various communities, take them far away, and mix them with other groups to create homogenized new Americans, really. And it was very popular in talking about the work of these schools to show before and after pictures. So here's a group of students that's just arrived off the train. They haven't undergone the hair cutting and the taking away of all their garments yet. This group is Diné, or Navajo. And then here's them a couple months later into school life. So it was a very different kind of life once we came to the boarding school. And this pattern was replicated in different areas throughout the U.S. that likewise had these mixing the students from different areas. This is a picture of Carlisle, the famous school gymnasium this is where Jim Thorpe trained, the 1912 Olympian and one of the creators, basically, of the NFL. And if you go there today, you can still see it. It's part of the base. And we made a pilgrimage recently, and we saw on a plaque the students literally built this building, not just because they did Votech manual labor kind of stuff, but they also paid for it too. And it's interesting because the boarding school experience touches nearly every community among Native Americans, but it's also one of the things that hasn't really been talked about much yet. There's some family stories, but there's actually also quite a bit of documentation that's available to be drawn on, and I see, you can see the cursor over here, but not over here. There we go. Just to show a little bit, this is a sample of microfilmed records that we obtained from the National Archives. Luckily, a large series of records have been microfilmed. They're not actually available anywhere in New Mexico, where a lot of this stuff happened. This is from the Government Indian Boarding School in Santa Fe. But there's a lot of information available So we just need to figure out a way to effectively connect it with people in the communities that are affected by it, that are recorded in it. And I think, I think it's a fair thing to say that a lot of people appear in government documents at various points. You may come through a port and be on a passenger list, various things. For Native Americans, boy, do you appear in a lot of federal documents. Indian self-determination only came through in the 1970s. So before that, a lot of things about Indian life were managed by the federal government and various agencies. So for people in New Mexico, their family, community, and individual histories are contained in large series of records from the Department of War, Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Lands Claims Commission. Right, for us in New Mexico, records of the territorial government. Even the U.S. Geological Survey could have stories about your family and your community. So when you look at it, it's kind of the paper version of big data. And there's challenges to working with it as a researcher. To do any meaningful research, say even about your family, you're going to need to be able to access a large amount of records. Different events are going to hop through different jurisdictions and different offices. So you're going to be able to access a lot of stuff, probably longer than you can do on an out-of-town field trip for research. So we need to eliminate geography as a barrier to being able to work with records. We need to be able to mark something in the document and be able to return to it later or show somebody a snippet of that document, whether it's in your online article or if you want to share it on your Facebook page so your family sees it right away. To create effective access to these masses of documents, we need to be able to add keyword tags to be able to find meaningful sections. And we're going to need to draw on a lot of knowledge from different communities and different histories. People who have first-hand experience, people who have stories from their grandparents. So we need to be able to really find a way to do collaborative work. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we can have material from multiple repositories join in that conversation? And what we don't want to do is we don't want to create a one-off solution that we have to struggle to support and that might not live beyond a particular staff person. Another thing that's really attractive for us as we're planning this solution with IIIF is that we could remove the bottleneck of in-house staff having to create all the navigation mileposts within a document. We're looking to crowdsource things like the beginnings of documents, and then later users can effectively page through that, or postmark chronological benchmarks, and not have the stuff hold up inside our repository while that's being done. Have it already available for people to work with. This is an example just showing some of the range of kinds of information. Again, even the TypeScript material is really resistant to OCR. This, I don't think we'd have an effective automatic solution for. This actually happens to be the student record card of my husband's great-grandfather. He was at Carlisle in the generation before Thorpe. And, there's always things in these documents that the families themselves don't know. For example, he's listed as enrolling from Laguna, which is a southern Pueblo tribe. He's actually from the northern Pueblos. And I think what this has to do with is there's a family story that he was first in the Santa Fe Indian School, but there wasn't enough to eat there. And he joined the boarding school system initially because he and his family were starving. There wasn't food. So finding that there wasn't really enough to eat at Santa Fe Indian School either, he left that and enrolled himself in Carlisle. So if he had gone down to Laguna and enlisted through that Indian agency, they wouldn't necessarily know that he had already been in the Santa Fe Indian School. So that might have been part of that. And then down below that list of names those are places where he was sent out for summer work. That was part of the Indian school system, is you go out and work in private homes. So these are various locations in Pennsylvania. So kind of another neat departure point that we could then go look and see what those things are in Pennsylvania. And there can be so much personal information in these documents. It was common for schools and universities too in the early 20th century to keep in correspondence with graduates. And so usually you can go to the university archives and pull up alumni files and find out a lot of neat stuff about after school. So here they're asking a lot of details about what his experience is after school and his situation. And then here he actually replies back. And this is from the same series. I just threw in a camera snap because one thing that's exciting about this for me too is you don't need to scan everything, right? And it's so much easier to do the camera click kind of imaging rather than scanning. But here, he writes back after filling out the form, and he's writing to them saying, I'm providing you all this information, and it'd be really helpful for us, out here in the field to get information from you too. Tell us about how we're all doing. Give us different kind of information that we can use. So this is a slide from IIIF, just kind of noting one of the solutions that's developed is that in an overlay of the image itself, you can actually add the annotations. You can add transcriptions of the material that's there, and you can add commentary on those too, and that will travel with the image in a meaningful way. Keep it permanent. So in our example, again, we're pre-implementation planning. So this is just a paste up, but it would be useful for us to be able to do things like annotate in these reports. Well, here's another example of boarding school deaths, because there's not really statistics on that. So that'd be useful for us to annotate. Also, running away in New Mexico, that's kind of, it's an issue, again, that doesn't have statistics. How often did students run away? And it's kind of serious because some of them, perished while they were doing it too. So to be able to go through and mark these as it came up, and then build a larger conversation from there would be really useful. And this afternoon we'll hear from Mike Appleby at Yale, who's done some really exciting work in implementing this kind of solution. Here again, just tag this passage talks about some of the manual labor the students are doing. The superintendent here is bragging that they carted 1,400 tons of coal 1 mile and saved a lot of money by doing it themselves and pouring cement for a building. The records we used in our test also contained a list of student names of the Santa Fe Indian School. And so here, we toss these up online just in an expedient manner. And this is the first time this information has been available to people. So even before we've been able to add the annotation so people can mark tribes and that kind of thing, it's really filling a need. And one of the things we're excited about is people could correct the OCR, the name, obviously, but they could also add the person's actual name, their name to their family, or be able to search by different tribal groups. And at MIAC, as part of our program, we're going to be building this infrastructure, but then we also want to make sure that there's a meaningful start to beginning the annotation work. So we're also, as part of our program, we're going to do a fellows program. We're calling this the Indigenous Digital Archive, and we're going to have Indigenous Digital Archive fellows, where we're going to reserve a spot for one person of each of the 23 tribes. They can be somebody that has no computer experience before, or somebody who's very savvy, somebody who's young, somebody who's an elder. These 23 people, we're all going to work together over the course of a year to start working with these documents, meeting sometimes in person in convenings, and then other times out in the home communities to do both collaborative work and then individual self-directed work. MIAC is the lead for this. We're also partnering with the Tribal Libraries Program of the New Mexico State Library. And there's a cultural center that's run by all 19 of the Pueblos collaboratively. So in this partnership, we hope to use this opportunity to strengthen relationships between those communities and the resources of those institutions. And recover these histories in the communities, recover and start those conversations today between generations. Thanks very much.